Hey there, kids. What's going on? Matt Boswell here, and you are listening to the Every Single Day Missionary Podcast. And this is the summer edition, but it is also the pre-fall edition. And by pre-fall, I mean pre-election cycle edition. In fact, today is officially the day that the voting stuff is in for the primaries. This is your deadline today, but by the time you hear this, you will have missed it. And if you missed it, well, don't worry, at least you got the general election coming up here in a few months. But that has sort of motivated my subject matter of the day for this little ditty that I'm going to launch out there. Now, if you're listening, you won't be able to see this. If you're watching, it's kind of interesting. I noticed on the camera here, my shirt, it's actually orange, but depending on the angle, it looks yellow, and then it looks orange. It's kind of cool. It's like, I just noticed that, and I'm like, interesting, cool. For you listening, you're just going to have to take my word for it that it keeps moving from orange to yellow, yellow to orange, just as I kind of glide back and forth from the microphone. And so it's going to be mesmerizing for the video watchers, and it's going to be nothing for the audio listeners. So anyway, so here is the subject that I want to talk about today. And I've been kind of processing this in the back of my head. And I will probably do some more things on this as we continue through the election cycle. But I want to be clear about something from the get-go. This is going to seem like, okay, Matt is getting political. I'm working really hard to not be political in this podcast or the ones that are coming up, as far as like, I'm not trying to favor A or B. That's really not my agenda. I believe that should be left to everybody's conscience. Romans 14 says, hey, we all have varying conscience levels and we need to act according to conscience. So that's going to be my thing here. But as you deal with a topic like this, you can't help but have the Bible intrude into areas that are labeled political, and you can't help but, as a person, hear those things, and you're going to drive it through the filter of whatever your political leaning is, and I completely understand that. So I'm trying to give a disclaimer at the beginning that says my heart is more to get to a spiritual principle, but it's just going to sound like it's bleeding into things, and you're going to want to make assumptions then about what's Matt trying to say? What's he trying to get us to read between the lines? What I'm trying to get you to do as far as reading between the lines is simply to kind of measure and assess where your own heart and conscience and biblical mindedness and Christ-centeredness is in relationship to the topic. Because one of the things, like I said, I've been kind of thinking about more is something that as evangelicals we are at risk of right now. Because we're so inundated in not just a political climate, but one that is particularly hostile right now. If you remember back, I don't know, this is probably 6 weeks ago or something like that, I did a podcast on We're All Marxist Relativists Now, right? And so every single topic you can imagine has somehow been politicized. Doesn't matter if it's Hollywood or if it's economics or if it's just general entertainment, certainly news, medicine, masks, you name it, it's politicized. And then everybody can find some verifying truth that defends their point of view, right? Like that's all there. And so in that, it's very hard to try to thread the needle on how to be distinctly Jesus-centered. I don't even want to say Christian, all right? I want to say distinctly Jesus-centered and letting Jesus dictate all that you do and it not getting pulled left or right in political discussion, which is kind of what Jesus faced in his own earthly ministry. They were constantly trying to get him to say something that would aid kind of a political narrative. Are you for Caesar or are you for God, i.e. the Jewish fundamentalist, legalist people of the day? Like, and then he would say something would like split the difference and everybody would be like, oh man, he escaped our clutches again. Drat, right? And so Jesus was a master at this, and we need to learn how to be masters at it too, but it is hard. And I know you're like, Matt, just get to your point. Keep saying how hard it is. Why don't you just say it and we can see how hard it is? Well, here's my general thesis of the day for this podcast, and that is this. We need to make sure as Christians, we are more committed to Christ-centered righteousness than contending for our religious rights. I want to say that again. We need to contend far more for our Christ-centered righteousness than contending for, demanding, or protecting our religious rights. Now, are those mutually exclusive? No. I don't believe they are, which is kind of what's motivating the particular topic of the day. But I do think where we are at risk is that we can sometimes think, especially in a time where it feels like the left hates religion and Christianity, and the right is the defenders of religion and Christianity. It can feel as though then this is a battle for religious liberty, and we must side with religious liberty champions at all costs. Doesn't matter what the cost is, we must protect our religious rights. Now, I'm all for protecting religious rights for all religious groups, not just Christians, but for Muslims, for Jehovah's Witnesses, for Hindus, for Buddhists, frankly, for atheists even, because they're starting kind of spiritual organizations and services, and we should protect their right as well. Like, I'm all about protecting everybody's religious rights, but not at the cost of our witness for righteousness in the world. And the danger, I think, right now for us is that we can almost turn a blind eye to the champions of religious liberty at the cost of our witness in culture as denizens of true Christ-centered righteousness, right? And this is really important because what I do see there is a tendency to do is if it is a person that sort of endorses our side of protecting those things, we turn a blind eye, or we have the potential to turn a blind eye to their unrighteousness because at least they're defending my right to be righteous. You understand what I'm saying there? We will defend their unrighteousness. We will turn a blind eye to their righteousness. We will pretend like their unrighteousness doesn't matter as much as the unrighteousness of the other side who may be against my rights. That's the unrighteousness that really matters. And we want to highlight and point at that and condemn that and judge that. And the cost of that is our witness in the world, that frankly, our witness should be nonpartisan. Right? Like, honestly, if you really distill this down, what makes Christianity flourish in every conceivable cultural environment is that at its core, it does a great job of being nonpartisan in the environment that it is in. This is why it can flourish in a socialist system, a communist system, a free republic system, a pure democracy system, an underground church, an above ground church, a building church, an online church. They can all flourish when they most represent Christ's righteousness in the world. And where they lose traction, where they decay, where people bail and other people won't join, is when it's no longer righteous according to Jesus. It might be self-righteous, it might be unrighteous, but it is not righteous according to Jesus. And so for us going into this time, while I am totally down with the idea that, you know what, as we think about how we're going to vote and who we're going to back and everything else, that we take positions, and we might even have reasons for conscience in there to take those positions, we want to be very cautious. And how we back all of that publicly, or the debates we choose to get into, or the things we decide to say, or to post, or to tweet, or to write, or to email, or to kind of permeate our landscapes. Like, we want to be very careful about that, because what is most important is that we continue to look Jesus righteous, not religious righteous, but we look Jesus righteous more than we look like we're fighting for and seeking to defend our religious rights. See, to me, this is super critical, because I think there's something that happens sometimes with evangelicalism in our culture, which is we are willing to give up our moral high ground for our political leverage. And we want the political leverage because we want to defend our rights. But if we defend our rights at the cost of our witness of righteousness, we fail. Like, we're not going to stand before Jesus and he's going to say, you made sure to keep religious rights going, correct? What he's going to say is, were you using the righteousness that I bestowed on you to be truly righteous in the world that I deposited you into so that you could be righteous in that environment? Did you do that? Did you live in such a way that people could see your good works and give me glory in heaven? Or did you live in such a way that you were caustic, you were turning a blind eye to wrong things, you just accepted what your guy did and condemned what the other guy did because he's not your guy or your girl or whatever else? Like, how did you navigate all of that? Because when we look at the New Testament, we can see pretty clearly what righteousness is. And if you think righteousness is simply a moral standard, then you have to look more deeply at the New Testament. It's not that righteousness isn't a moral standard, but it is a moral standard with a humble heart attached to that standard. It has a keen awareness and knowledge of the fact that we demand grace from God, in that grace is the only thing that secures us. It's demanded of God to give it to us, because if it was our merit and our good deeds and our good works, it would fail. The demand on our lives is God receives us by grace, and that imparts righteousness, and therefore in that righteousness, we should be those who deposit grace in our world. We should be humble in what we do, but we still want to maintain the standard that God has for us in our lives. And when it comes to playing out righteousness, we want to make sure that there is clarity as far as what righteousness looks like. In fact, I was looking at some passages that are so critical to me when it comes to this and what we're supposed to display as we go into the season of wanting to be more righteous than we are just contending for rights when it comes to our religious practice and faith, all right? So one of the places I think about is Romans chapter 14 that says, hey, there are gray areas in the Christian life. And in those gray areas where the Bible doesn't firmly say yes or no, right or wrong, some Christians are going to land on one side and some are going to land on the other. And our job is to serve each other more than judge and condemn each other. That's super clear there. And when we talk about politics and whether you're going to vote for President Trump or Vice President Biden, or you're going to do a third-party candidate or whatever you're going to do, right? That's a gray area. But in that gray area, our focus must be what Paul says in chapter 14, verse 17, when he says the kingdom of God, it's not a matter of eating and drinking. And in our context, we could say it's not a matter of voting or endorsing a candidate, but it's a matter of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. Now, here's why I think that's important. Righteousness is tethered to peace and joy. And so as we go into this time and as we're talking, sharing, posting, saying, tweeting, texting, whatever, if we don't have peace and we don't have joy, we probably aren't doing this very righteously. If we have anxiety, we have anger, we have frustration, we're bombastic, we're clubbing each other over the head with why you're dumb on who you want to vote for or what it is you believe, or don't you see how dire it is? We'll lose all our freedoms if X wins. Like, if that's what we do, then we're not exhibiting joy, we're not exhibiting peace, and that's not righteous, right? So righteousness and peace and joy are a kind of a trifecta way of assessing, am I displaying this in a righteous context? Because again, it's more important that you are righteous than you have your rights. Because if that wasn't the case, then Christianity would have never flourished. And honestly, this goes back to a podcast I did a couple of weeks ago. I suspect that the reason it's not flourishing in the United States, but it's decaying at a radical rate, is because, again, we are not displaying a focus on righteousness as much as we are on rights. And what I mean by righteousness is not moral umbrage and pointing the finger at all of the leftists or whatever we want to do. What I'm talking about is displaying that Christ-like character that is undeniable in the Gospels, right? That's the thing I'm talking about, because when you look at Jesus, you see the true display of righteousness. And that righteousness sometimes, you know what? It was unhinged, but it was unhinged at legalistic religious people who had 10,000 rules, judge the lost world, and he says, that is not how this rolls. You don't have the room, frankly, to judge lost people. You're a witness to lost people, right? Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 5 and goes into chapter 6, man. Why are you standing around pointing the finger at those who are lost? That's not your job description, right? You're supposed to be light to them, love to them, right? You're supposed to show them what grace really looks like. That's true righteousness. And so don't sacrifice that for your candidate. Don't sacrifice that for your political position. Don't even sacrifice that for something that's probably really, really good, like rights. Because rights should be subservient to righteousness. Another great passage, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 21 to 23. Paul is writing to this young pastor who lives in a very pluralistic society, lots of ideas clashing, lots of truths. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got a God. Everybody's got a position. And then he says this, therefore, Timothy, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master in his house, and ready for every good work. And we go, great. How can it be honorably used? Does it mean I pick fights, have a lot of arguments, take a lot of stands, let everybody know how they're dumb? No, I don't do that. Here's what he says. He says, so flee youthful passions, which in one way you could say are sexual or lustful, But the other, a youthful passion, is just going headlong into arguments and foolish fights. Not the content of what you want to fight for is bad, but the way you do it is wrong, and it doesn't win anybody. You're scoring points more than you're winning people. That's not going to help. And so he says, flee youthful passions, right? Because it's interesting. He'll get into this controversial stuff here in a second as far as flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness. Pursue righteousness, Timothy, which is also what? Well, faith and love and peace. And along with these, right, it's those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. And so peace and peacemaking and peace doing and having peace and loving others, having faith in God in the midst of the circumstance, actually believing that if I live more like Jesus, I hopefully will build more inroads to those who may be opposed to Jesus, as opposed to I'm more focused on my here and now, earthly fights, earthly wants, earthly desires, earthly agenda, and I don't build bridges, I build walls, and from that I reach less people, and now I have even more animosity on my front porch. No, this is a way that we can actually authentically reach out to people. He goes on to say in verse 23, have nothing to do. I'm going to say that again. Have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. They only breed quarrels, right? Many of our political discussions are probably more like quarrels. And many of them, even though you go, no, my position's wise and their position's foolish, if we approach it from the position of you're an idiot and I'm smart, that's going to be a foolish quarrel, right? You're not trying to win anybody over. You're just trying to score some points. And if you're doing it online, you're doing it in such a way that your side goes, yes, and they give you a thumbs up and a heart and a smiley face and a ha-ha at the cost of our witness of righteousness in the world, right? This is where we need to do business different. If we are quarreling, if we are trolling, if we are just wanting to stir the pot and be difficult, that ain't like Jesus, man. That is not like Jesus, right? It is not at all. In fact, even tone of Jesus kind of comes to mind. Like if you read Matthew 23, where he has the woe to the scribes and woe to the Pharisees, and he's saying all this stuff, I think we tend to read that like, woe to you, like he's chewing their face off and then spitting like venom at them, and like acid is coming from his eyeballs and melting his critics, but that could just as easily, he could say, woe to you, don't you see you're being whitewashed tombs? Don't you see you're making people twice the sons of hell because you're more concerned with your religious thing than you are with true God-centered righteousness? Like, it could be a imploring, pleading, change, please change. It's so serious kind of tone. And if we're going to have any warning to the world, we should have it more in the realm of care and heart and worry for them and empathy, not I get my rights or else. That is not righteousness. That is just contending for earthly rights. Very different than relating things to Jesus. Also think about this from James chapter 3. He talks about earthly wisdom. And earthly wisdom is divisive and attacking and biting at one another, right? But then he gets to verse 17 of chapter 3 and he says, but the wisdom that is from above, it's first pure. It has a pure heart, pure intention, and then it's peaceable, right? And I love that. Again, that's why if you're trolling, if you're trying to bait people into things, if you post articles or whatever, or start conversations just to make the other side's head explode, and you think that's great, or you love it that your candidate goes out there and just ticks off the other side and says it as they see it, and they don't care how their words hit and all of that, and you love that, you might want to repent about that. You shouldn't love that. You should go, that's what happens in the world of politics, but you shouldn't love that. I shouldn't love that, right? No matter what side I land on or you land on, we should be grieved when people who claim the name of Christ don't act like Christ. And here's the thing, when it comes into this election this year, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden claim Christ. I know right now there's people on opposite sides of this going, he's not a Christian, he's not a Christian. Newsflash, they both claim Christ. We should be sad every time these two men who claim Christ don't sound like Jesus, don't act like Jesus, don't communicate like Jesus, treat their enemy like an enemy, and they don't love their enemy. All of that stuff we should be sad about. We should not be racking up the points and who got the best bite on the other guy and who has the best little quip and quotable. Like, we shouldn't love that. We should be saddened by the immaturity of Christians in the political arena. It should grieve our hearts because, again, it's not the display of righteousness, because righteousness and wisdom that's from above is first pure and then it's peaceable. Oh, but then it gets worse. It's also gentle, and it's open to reason, and it's full of mercy and good fruits. It's impartial and sincere. Here's the thing, friends. Everything we do over the next few months as it relates to this cacophony of crazy that's going to go on between COVID, no school in session, a political campaign, an economic stress, all of those things, what it needs to see from us is us contending for true wisdom and true righteousness, right? That is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. It's impartial and sincere. And this is why I use this passage in relationship to righteousness. It says, and a harvest of righteousness is sown, is planted into the world in peace by those who make peace. So here's my challenge to every one of us watching and listening today. Your mission, if you decide to accept it between now and the beginning of November when the election hits, and for probably a month after, if I'm guessing what will happen, will probably happen, your mission in the world is to sow peace if you want Jesus and his message to win. Now, if you go, you know what, that's secondary. The most important thing is that my guy wins. And if I have to sacrifice Jesus' heart for me to be a peacemaker and to sow righteousness, if I have to sacrifice to get that done, that is incredibly earthly. I'm being very clear right now. That is incredibly earthly, right? It's saying, Jesus, do me a favor, take a back seat till my idol gets in place, and then I'll bring you up to the front again. Like, that's what that's doing. Now, am I saying you therefore can't support your candidate, can't support your party? I'm not saying that at all. I'm not. You can totally do that. They're two flawed parties and two flawed systems with two flawed candidates because all human beings and all systems are flawed. That's absolutely true. And you can have real conviction and your conscience about which of these two options, or maybe if you're a third-party person, what you're going to back. It's totally fine. You can do that with complete purity before God. There's no problem there. I have no problem with any of that. I believe in the gray areas, we are free to vote conscience, but there are things inside of those directions that are clearly black and white that we want to display. And the clear black and white things are these things like this. That we have good fruits in the midst of it. We have mercy in the midst of it. We're open to reason. We don't just like say something bombastic and walk away. No, we're open to reason. We're peaceable in it. We're pure. We're impartial. We're sincere. Don't say, well, I'm being sincere by being a jerk. I mean, you might be a sincere jerk, but nobody needs a sincere jerk. We need sincere people that feel what others feel. I mean, part of this idea of impartial and sincere and open to reason, it's this idea that says, you know what, I can get in the Nikes or the Birkenstocks or the loafers of the other person, and I can see their point of view. I can authentically, honestly see where they're coming from. And I'm not going to just be like, oh, they're stupid. But rather, oh, I see where they're coming from. I understand their heart. I understand their motives. I see their background. I want to get that so I can better help them understand what I'm trying to say, as opposed to I'm just going to run them over with a bunch of facts or a bunch of statements or some article or some caustic little diatribe or whatever else. Like, that's not going to solve anything, help anybody. It's only going to further divide. And then the world will look and say, Christians are no different than anybody else. In fact, what they tend to do is say Christians are worse, right? Because they claim a moral high ground that is their book. But if they don't live in accordance with their book, if they don't actually have objectivity with their book as they look at all people's, and they just kind of throw it to the side for their group, but then they hold it up for the other group, that is not sincere. That is not impartial. That is slanted. And that's not going to serve anybody. So I know I've had some strong words today. Sometimes I have them, sometimes I don't, but today they're strong words because I do. I really think we are at a unique time as evangelical Christianity in the United States where I don't think we've done a great job of displaying the true Christ-centered righteousness as much as we have probably fought for a lot of our rights to be maintained or kept. And you know what? In the Supreme Court, there's been a lot of wins on that one. But I'm not sure if it's been at the cost of the kingdom or in support of the kingdom. And so I believe we need to work really hard in this season to turn that around. And what most is clear is that we have a Christ-centered righteousness more than we are, again, fighting for and literally killing lost people over. I mean that figuratively, not literally, but we are literally breaking bonds with lost people so we can keep our religious rights. This even goes to things like, don't say, if the other side wins, we're doomed, we're lost, the world will fall apart, the country will fall, churches will be going to the way of China, pastors will be imprisoned, like all of the fear-mongering stuff. And part of the reason I say that is, first of all, Jesus is like, dude, I told you that was going to happen anyway. Like, honestly, I still go back to, like, it's so funny when Jesus is like, you want to sign up for me? You're signing up for persecution. Frankly, as Americans, we've gotten off easy in comparison to what Jesus said we'd face, right? So that's kind of A. But B, we don't know the future. We just know what we're supposed to do in the moment. We know right now in the moment we're supposed to be these people that are avoiding the quarrels, as Timothy was told, avoid the foolish controversies, rather be really focused on honorable use, right? So don't be all impassioned over things that only divide versus heal. Rather pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace, good fruits, reason, gentleness. Like every one of these words is the display of righteousness. And quite honestly, that's what the world most needs right now, right? If we want to see our country changed, it will not come from Washington, right? It will not come from Washington. As Christians, what we most want to see is hearts that are changed, and that's never going to come from the top down. That's got to come from the inside out through the Holy Spirit doing that work. But how are they going to know unless there was one who is sent, and we are the ones who are sent? And so we need to embody this biblical, Christ-centered righteousness, not religious righteousness, not religious rights, Christ-centered righteousness. And I believe that when we do, and when we own that in our lives, we will be very potent, very powerful, very useful, very humble, very encouraging everyday missionaries.